Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Isle of Trains All Aboard, an abstracted little pick up and deliver in a small box. Isle of Trains All Aboard is a re-implementation of Isle of Trains, a game which I've never really played, but I have played this one. And this is a prototype, all rules, components, artwork, all that stuff, everything subject to change, although I think artwork's mostly done. Most of the stuff is probably done, but prototype, all things prototype, and there'll be a link down below to the Kickstarter if you want to go ahead and check that out. Isle of Trains, like I said already, is an abstracted kind of pick up and deliver game. The goal of the game is to basically get as many points as possible, more efficiently than other players, before the game runs out, before the turn timer runs out. And more specifically, you're trying to do a bunch of deliveries in this game, and there's a variety of types of deliveries that you'll be doing. You'll be taking 2 actions a turn. We'll cover all that in a second, but the first thing over here is there's 3 basic kinds of deliveries you're going to be going for. The first is every single island over here has a dominant location that you'll be delivering to. This dominant location where you'll be going ahead and delivering a specific amount of coal or whatever the resource you have is. You'll be delivering that to the island, and then you'll be taking that card, putting it in front of you, and you'll go ahead and march that train along the track 1. That's the first kind of delivery you can do. The second kind of delivery is each one has secondary delivery locations over here, and you can deliver to those secondary locations as well for the point shown over there. That will not advance the track over here. It will not advance the train. And then lastly, you can also make deliveries of passengers to these locations near each region, and when you deliver passengers to those locations, once you close off the passengers, delivering over here, this green passenger over here goes to this location over here, the Flint Beach, the green location, you'll get the reward. And once the third passenger is dropped off, again, you'll go ahead and advance the train along the track. And when the train eventually hits the end, you will trigger the end game. At least in competitive mode. Solo mode's a little different. We'll touch upon that later. That's the basic idea of the game. You're trying to make deliveries. You're trying to deliver resources and or passengers, which will be the timer on the game and or the deck running out. The deck running out can also be a timer for the end game, and try to get as many points as possible by the end of the game. Points you'll be getting for the main delivery icons on the cards, from some of these spots on the passengers over here, and getting these tokens over here, all these tokens that you'll acquire throughout the course of the game. That's how you win, how you end it, all of that. As far as the gameplay is taking 2 actions a turn. Actions that can be anything from loading up your train. You're going to start the game with a single core train over here, and you can go ahead and load things or people or passengers or cards onto trains depending on the specific resource. More specifically over here, this starting engine over here has the ability to hold a single passenger in the train, and when you load a passenger to the train, you draw 2 cards, sort of. That sort of is a big part of the game. When you load things into passenger cars or train cards or load cars into this game, depending on whether you load into your own car or your opponent's cars, you get the loading bonus, which results in an incentive to start loading up other people's cars and trains because you get the bonuses from those, with caveats and adjacencies and things around that will be exceptions. But that's the basic idea over there. The core actions you can take in the game are your core actions you can take are, first of all, drawing a passenger from the bag. You can always go ahead and draw a passenger from the bag over here to add a new passenger to your reserve in front of you. You can also go ahead and build a card. Building cards in the game, there's going to be all these train cards over here, as well as sometimes you'll have building cards you can build as well. This would be an example of a building card that you can build, and whether trains or building cards, they'll have a cost in the corner that you can see, and you'll put that card into play. So for example, if I want to go ahead and build this card over here, well, that's an engine over here. Let's say I want to build this fuel line over here, and I can go ahead and build it over there. I'll have to discard 5 cards to do so. So I have to have more cards. Let's pretend that I do, and I go ahead and discard the 5 cards to go ahead and build that. You can also go ahead and upgrade vehicles. So for example, this boxcar over here, if you had a level 6 tanker over here, a level 6 tanker, well, it's level 2, level whatever, but if you had a tanker with a cost of 6, you can go ahead and pay the difference in order to put that card in play, upgrading your card. So for example, going back to my hand of cards over here, where we have an engine, putting this level 3 engine into play, I'd have to go ahead and pay the difference between 3 and 0 for my starting engine. I'd pay those 3 cards, and I'd put that engine in play. Now, engines do have a capacity on them. This capacity indicates that I can hold 6 of these little red pips worth of vehicles on the end, and that means the better the engine you have, the more you can carry, and the more you can carry, the better the deliveries you can make. So again, some actions, once again, a repeat of the actions. You can go ahead and grab passengers. You can go ahead and add and build something, whether a building or whether building new train cars. You can go ahead and make a delivery in the game. You can make a delivery to the actual board where you can go ahead and drop things off, and then before we cover deliveries, we should cover the load action. The load action is where you take your hand of cards, all those cards you've been having, and you load them into the vehicle. Now we kind of briefly touched upon this with a passenger. You can take a passenger, loading it into your own or your opponent's train car, and if it's your opponent, you'll get that benefit over there. And then whether it's a vehicle or whatnot, let's say over here if I have oil, if you have an oil resource, you can go ahead and load that into an oil car if it has the loading icon for oil. And again, depending on yours or your opponent's, you'll get the benefits, which could be additional cards, often is additional cards, but sometimes it's additional actions. The additional actions, some technicalities, some rule stuff we're not really heavily getting into. So for example, if you have extra load actions, you don't get the benefit from those. There's a bunch of small little details we won't get into, but the basic idea Everything we have so far, at least the basic idea, is that you have 2 actions a turn. Those actions can be getting new passengers, loading things onto your vehicles, building, or making deliveries to the spots. You're trying to make deliveries to slowly get as many points as possible while driving along endgame, and whoever does so most efficiently at the end of, well, the train reaching the end of the track will win the game. And that is basically Isle of Trains. A few other small stuff we didn't really heavily get into, the various bonuses over here. For example, over here, this spot over here would be a 3-card bonus plus a 2-point bonus. You'll have something like that. You'll have load actions. Over here, you'll have 2 cards plus a load action as your bonus. Over there, there's going to be little rules and technicalities as far as the various extra actions you can get. There's going to be upgraded engines and cars, all these different bonuses, all these different point scoring. One thing we didn't talk about as well is various cars will have scoring indicators on them, indicating points at the end of the game. You'll get those as well. And then variety of buildings. This building over here is a fairly basic one. It simply gives you 8 points, and it counts as a wild resource if you're using it as a resource. But many of the other buildings are actually conditional points. Let's see if we can find one over here. You'll have conditional point buildings. So, for example, this one over here would be a conditional point building where you get points for filling specific conditions, whatever those conditions might be. And that is basically Isle of Trains. Solo mode is a slightly different puzzle. I have played this one solo, so I can comment on that. I don't always do so. But this is one where the solo mode is basically a bit of a timer. There's 2 ways to play it solo. There's scenario-based and then just trying to beat a score-based. Both of them involve a timer where at the end of every single sequence of 2 turns, you're going to grab a card from the top of the deck, adding it to the discard pile, which acts as a timer. Between that and actually naturally just going through the deck and drawing cards and building up your engine, you'll eventually hit a point where you run out of cards and the game is over and you either achieve your scenario objectives or you got as many points as you possibly could and you'll call it a day. And also, because it's solo, you do get the benefit for loading your own cars. And that is Isle of Trains. As far as the review, starting off with ease of play. Rulebook's pretty basic, pretty easy to dive into. This is prototype, so all those caveats apply. I will say that for the most part, I find the game pretty simple and intuitive. There's some small little differences in terms of just rules and things like the fact that when you load one way, when you're putting off, when you're loading resources into your opponent's cars, they get the bonus. When you load into your own cars, you don't. When you use a bonus action on your own cars, the small nitpicks of details. But for the most part, I find the rules fairly easy and intuitive to dive into. It is a pick up and deliver game within a very abstracted sense. This map over here does not matter at all. It is a visual representation. I could mix these cards up over here. It wouldn't matter in the slightest. The tracks don't matter. It's just a representation. It doesn't actually matter as far as the gameplay. As far as player count, as far as the easy play going to easy play, playtime runs in around 45 minutes or so, I'd say. I don't know what the box actually says on this one, but I'd say for our end it was roughly 45 minutes or so per game, roughly in that range. And yeah, a Tales pace is fairly minimal. This is a very small game with a very small footprint. What you see here is what you get, plus an expanded row of like 6 or 7 cars per person, depending on how big you manage to build your train. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 4 player game. I've played this one at solo and at 2 players. I have not had a chance to dive into 3 and 4. I am curious how it would play out, specifically because of the nature of the fact that when you load things, you're loading into other people's cars, which benefits them, but you're doing so in a way that benefits yourself because you get those bonuses. I think a 2-player game a 1-player game kind of ignores that entirely. A 2-player game has you inherently doing it to each other. A 3-player game could provide an interesting element of keeping the leader in check by loading into other people's cars. I haven't had a chance to see that, but I am curious to see how that plays out. So 1 and 2 players for myself, and both 1 and 2 worked well. Different puzzles entirely. 2 is a competitive head-to-head, and 1 is just a solo beat your own or scenario based, but both worked fine. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, to begin with, this is a puzzle game. That's ultimately what this is. This is a puzzle game which you're trying to look at your starting hand of 5 cards. You're going to have your hand of cards. You're going to be trying to go through those cards and figure out, what am I building? What do I have access to right now? What are the right options to build? Which cabooses will give me those ongoing benefits that I can benefit from? Because if I can get one of those locked in and pursue a strategy that works well for me, that can really help. And which places do I want to deliver to? And do I have to worry about other players getting there first? Because that's going to be part of the puzzle as well. Every spot has different rewards in it, and you have to be mindful of the fact that building your train cars a certain way, building your vehicles a certain way, can help you achieve certain goals, depending on how you factor in, well, that spot will require crates and oil and coal, and if these ones will require those. So if I build a car that has 2 oil capacity and 2 crate capacity, I'll be able to make those deliveries. Meanwhile, I'm trying to be mindful of the passengers too, because passengers can be a huge and easy source of extra cards. One of the actions we didn't really talk about is when you load a passenger or card, what you can do is you can either grab a passenger from the bag, or you can just take a card from the card row over here. You can simply grab a card. Usually it's an inefficient action because usually other things that give you cards in the game will require far less actions to get far more cards. Dropping off a single passenger can give you 2 or 3 cards, and so those often are more efficient if you can plan around those things. But ultimately the game comes down to being a puzzle. A puzzle where you have some information up front, information you'll utilize to try to figure out how you're going to build things out. You have that guaranteed hand of cards, but then from there it's a bit of a a guessing game of what shows up in your hand, how you're going to adjust, which cards you're going to upgrade. Are you going to upgrade that card that you just got, or are you just going to build an entirely new one? Being mindful of the train capacity as you go. There are a lot of strategic options as far as how to build your train, how to build your engine, how to be as efficient as possible as you make these deliveries, and trying to figure out the most efficient way to get points in Isle of Trains. And then additionally, it does all of that with the table size, the space, the cost, all those factors. This is a very small footprint game. It's not a button shy game, not by a long shot, but it's fairly close as far as the footprint it takes up. It just has a whole lot more than 18 cards in this deck over here. But it gives you a lot of puzzle for a very little amount of everything else. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, I'm not a fan, this is a nitpick to be clear, but I'm not a fan of the fact that we have this beautiful map over here that has no gameplay representation whatsoever. No impact on the gameplay, it's just visually pretty as you slowly remove cards from the board as you accomplish things. It kind of bugs me that we have this completely abstracted game with a map that looks like it's a spot where trains should be traveling along. This is a nitpick to be clear, it's not a big deal, the game works just fine as is, but the location, the physical representation of the map, which I was looking forward to having an impact on the play, didn't. Secondly, and more importantly, I would say that the game has information overload to a large degree. What I mean by that is when you're playing this game, between the cards on the table, between the cards you have over here, between the cards you have in your hand, between the fact that as you're drawing cards you have to choose from here or from here, which cards you're going to discard, what you're going to do, what pathways you're going to pursue, which of the cards in your hand of cards you're going to be using for resources to put in your trains, which ones you're trying to build those engines. You have a whole lot of choices in front of you, and there's so much information on all these cards that there's a large degree of information overload when you play this game. There's a large degree of, you kind of have to pick a pathway, commit to it, and move forward in it, and not worry about the fact that there's a million separate side options you can do and will want to do to try to get as efficient as possible, to try to get everything done. This is a game where, at least for myself, I've had to just choose to ignore a lot of the information. The amount of times I draw a handful of cards and I just stop looking at it because I would like this game to not last forever, and I sit there and I'm like, I have something I'm doing. I'm going for that strategy. I'm going to play this card. Yes, I just drew 5 more cards because I made that delivery. Whatever. I have to hold off. I have to wait because I cannot look at every single card and constantly be reevaluating my options when the cards are used as the currency. The cards are what you discard as the currency, so you inherently have so many of them coming in, and I don't want to repivot every 3 seconds. So information overload is going to be my biggest complaint as far as Isle of Trains. Information overload with the choice of either being efficient and taking forever, or giving up an efficiency and just charging confidently forward. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, this is a very dry pick up and deliver game. The whole art, the board, all that stuff, everything's abstracted here. This is a very dry pick up and deliver where you're just gathering cards, using cards, loading your train, dropping things off, and it's abstracted to a large degree, including the lack of a map. Additionally, there's information overload on these cards, not the decision information. The decision information is a different category, but just the fact that there's a lot of symbols on these cards, there's a lot of just the symbols at the top. I mean, half the rulebook, literally, here's a good indicator. Half the rulebook, if not more than half the rulebook, is devoted to just telling you what all the cards do, because yes, you could read the iconography and it's not that bad, but it's not immediately intuitive, and it'll take a game or two to be under your belt, and then some cards are different exceptions, and so it's nice to have that access where you see all that information in the rulebook, but it also means that half of the rules are devoted to just being a reference for all these symbols and icons and choices and options on these cards. As far as final thoughts on Isle of Trains, and Isle of Trains All Aboard from Granda Games, I like this game. It's a fun little engine of trying to figure out how to efficiently pick up and deliver and do all the stuff you're doing, and it does provide a rewarding puzzle. At the same time, it is limited in what it's able to do. It's a small box size, it's a small footprint, it's going for a specific size, a package range, all those things, and so while I do enjoy it, it also doesn't blow me away. It's an enjoyable experience and one that gave me a solidly creative puzzle with a decent degree of variety of different ways of approaching that puzzle, but also one that doesn't have that gimmick that really makes it something that I really solidly enjoy. It feels like a tiny epic game, box size and all. It feels like a tiny epic game in the sense that it's giving you a good puzzle, a good engine, something that is rewarding, and something that I also don't feel the need to overly own and continue to dive into. This is one that's a 3.5 out of 5 for me. Fun, rewarding, engaging, but not blowing me away past the fact that it's fitting all of this into this box size and doing an amazing job of giving you more than reasonably, giving you a very good game for the box size, price point, table space, all of that kind of situation. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Innovation. Innovation gave me a very similar feeling of the puzzle of giving you information overload, of trying to figure out how just what you're going to do as you try to pursue 15 million different strategies forward. And then similarly, Race for the Galaxy and the multiple use cards and discarding cards as a resource and tucking cards underneath things to be a resource that you're generating in order to be selling those cards. Race for the Galaxy gave me a similar feeling of the multi-use approach to what this game is doing, with a lot more going on behind it. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.